Welcome back to FAWKES News, talking about Trump. Is he Hitler? Is he not Hitler? And why is the rhetoric still even getting ramped up even more now that he has won the election? We've won the House. Conservatives have won the sentence. I say we because I was a voter of Trump. I'm kind of the for me, it was like I'm an anti-Dick Cheney guy. When Dick Cheney went hard in the paint for the Democrats, I learned that it's all about the industrial military complex and the industrial pharmaceutical complex. And for me, I'm just not that guy. And that's what I was voting on behalf of today. But it seems like there are a lot of upset celebrities. Take a listen to some of your favorite celebrities from the mainstream and what they have to say about the new Trump election.
Right. For women, for children, for the hundreds of thousands of hardworking immigrants who make this country go, for healthcare, for our climate, for science, for journalism, for justice, for free speech. It was a terrible night for poor people, for the middle class, for seniors who rely on Social Security, for our allies in Ukraine, for NATO, for the truth.
I don't think Donald Trump's a good person. I'd even go so far as to say he's a bad person. Now, in my defense, I'm only basing that on everything I've ever been taught about what makes someone good or bad. That's it.
Who knows what the next 4 years are going to be like? What we do know is that we're going to be governed by a monstrous child surrounded by cowards and grifters. And my brain keeps pumping out an unlimited supply of ramifications. It's really hard to see a bright side here.
Yes, it's very hard to see a bright side here, as if Jimmy Kimmel's not a bad person by this definition. I guess I'd like to know his definition of what a good person is.
Do you know what the funniest thing is about that? About Colbert saying is, I'm having a really hard time finding a bright side to this. Colbert, more than any other person, gets to enjoy the upside of this. You know why? Do you remember when Stephen Colbert took over the Late Late Show with David Letterman? His ratings were in the toilet because what people expected from Stephen Colbert was the Colbert we had in the Colbert Report. He was very funny. He was playing a character of himself. Well, the ratings for the Late Late Show were in the toilet. And then Donald Trump comes along and it creates all kinds of liberal outrage. And that's when we saw the shift in tone on all these late night comedy shows. You know, like Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien, they kind of gave shots both ways, David Letterman. But in the era of Colbert, it's all about dogging on Trump. And they leaned into that, and they had Donald Trump to kind of poke at for 4 years, and then he went away. And then you have Joe Biden, and, you know, poking at him and all that is just kind of sad. You know, it's like making fun of grandpa. But now Donald Trump is back. Do you have any idea what that means for the ratings of guys like Kimmel? What it will do for Stephen Colbert? It gives them their boogeyman again. It gives them back their guy that they have to rail against. So Trump coming back is the best thing that could happen for advertising purposes for guys like Stephen Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel. And they get to go up there and act all maudlin and sad, which is exactly what we want from our late night comedians. We want them to be the leaders of sadness. I'll never forget when Colbert did his election night coverage for the first time around with Hillary and Trump. And the whole thing, you could tell, was set up to just be dogging on Trump the entire time and congratulate Hillary on this solid win because she was projected to win. They had nothing to do. They had no jokes. All their big cue cards were like, well, she didn't win, so we just throw these in the trash. So they went upstairs to the CBS Evening News, and they're like, is anybody up here at this hour? And there's some guy sitting around. He's like, yeah, I'm here. Well, why don't you come be on the Colbert Show? Comes downstairs. He says to everybody, well, Donald Trump being elected is probably the worst thing that's happened to this country since 9/11. And you're watching the Late Late Show, people, right? This is home of the top 10, just the genre itself. You know, Conan O'Brien, we're supposed to be seeing Jay Leno's, jaywalking, his headlines, Conan O'Brien's robot on a toilet. You know, it used to be funny, and now it's just sad. So I think it's funny that Stephen Colbert says that that he has a really hard time seeing the bright side because he's going to take the next 4 years to the bank. No one is going to more directly profit in terms of what his job is more than Stephen Colbert. Go ahead.
There's nothing easier than making fun of somebody that you actually hate. You know what I mean? So like the jokes almost write themselves when you have somebody that you dislike. So Colbert absolutely hating Donald Trump. It should be no brainer for him to be able to write some really good one-liners. And listen, I look forward to hearing them. I like a good joke. I look good roast at other people, even if I tend to be fans. I think it was also interesting to take note that Jimmy Kimmel decided that he wanted to cry. He only cried in 2 parts of his little speech there, which is over dramatic in my opinion. But he cried when he talked about illegal immigrants, and he cried when he talked about Ukraine. What's the significance there? He didn't cry when he was talking about the elders. He didn't cry when he talked about the poor people and the middle class people, but he only cried or got choked up when what it means for illegal immigrants in Ukraine. What does Jimmy Kimmel give a shit about illegal immigrants in Ukraine? I mean, obviously we all empathize and give some sort of a shit, but like, what is it that those 2 things make him want to cry about it?
I don't know. Other than those are just the big liberal causes being, specifically Ukraine being something else. He refuses to recognize it as a money laundering scam as it is. Yeah, God forbid that Donald Trump has already taken calls from Russia about putting an end to this war. Do we not want to see an end to the war? Like, if we could put an end to the war right now, what would be the benefit of supporting Ukraine in a model that's basically led to the lengthening of this war? It's been catastrophic. Of course, it keeps going. But if we can broker some kind of peace deal now, then that will save many more deaths in the future to have peace now. Now, I get it. The only way you can have peace now is maybe through some sort of negotiated surrender or compromise or something. But if you care about human lives, if that's your chief thing, and if you want to see peace and an end to war, then you should be glad that a deal is coming to the table, because there was not really any deal coming to the table before. So I'm glad for that. And Jimmy Kimmel particularly disgusts me, because he has been one of these guys, very much a liberal leader during the safety pin era, the Me Too movement. And we forget all about his appearances on The Man Show, in which he was a disgusting pig, and he used that humor to line his pockets. But now he has a holier-than-thou attitude when it comes to being politically correct and humor. And of course, all these shows are dead, and I haven't watched them in a long time. But they think that there's some sort of moral leaders to go out there and be lecturing and saying that our country's going to be led by thugs and grifters and cowards, and as if the last 4 years or as if that hasn't always been the tune of American politics. But Kamala Harris went out there recently. I've got a clip from C-SPAN that I'll show now, but this was her last desperation move. I think she realized that she wasn't going to win. And I have my own theories about whether or not she even wanted to be president. Sure, she ran a few years ago, but she just spent 107 days being the second most important person in the country, and I don't think she liked it, because she took as much time off of her campaign as Joe Biden did. She didn't go on Joe Rogan. She went on SNL. She took the easy way and everything, had all these days off. And I'm not sure that she wanted to be president. And you look at Joe Biden, and he's hardly bereft at all. He's happy. He's out there smiling. I think he's enjoying himself. But this was the last desperation.
Did you see where Biden's wife wore red to the polls?
I didn't see that. I saw
she
Biden
wore a red dress.
I saw Biden wearing a MAGA hat and smiling. So the narrative on that is easy to decode. I mean, if you take a guy like Joe Biden, who's really not a principled Democrat, he worked for the Democrat Party. It's like saying I worked for Target instead of Walmart, right? Well, he got fired. He got replaced. And so anybody who's been fired, who then sees the business that fired them go on to fail, you just kind of feel good about that. He's got no warm feelings for Kamala. I'm sure that was a strategic decision in choosing her. Surely a female of color was designed to bolster the ticket. Unfortunately, Democrats could only win elections by large amounts when an old white is the president, as we saw with Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris, both getting about 15 million fewer votes than an old white. So what does that say? It says that either old whites are good for the Democrat Party, or it says that 15 million Democrat voters were abducted from the face of the earth, or it suggests that 15 million votes were coming from pet cemeteries and things like that, and they were never legitimate. But she gets on C-SPAN, addresses the nation, and mentions some of his rhetoric. This comes from C-SPAN, so I'll just go ahead and I will let it play, and then I will comment.
So yesterday we learned that Donald Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, a retired 4-star general, confirmed that while Donald Trump was president, he said he wanted generals like Adolf Hitler had. Donald Trump said that because he does not want a military that is loyal to the United States Constitution. He wants a military that is loyal to him. He wants a military who will be loyal to him personally, one that will obey his orders even when he tells them to break the law or abandon their oath to the Constitution of the United States. In just the past week, Donald Trump has repeatedly called his fellow Americans the enemy from within, and even said that he would use the United States military to go after American citizens. And let's be clear about who he considers to be the enemy from within. Anyone who refuses to bend a knee or dares to criticize him would qualify in his mind as the enemy within, like judges, like journalists, like nonpartisan election officials. It is deeply troubling and incredibly dangerous that Donald Trump would invoke Adolf Hitler, the man who is responsible for the deaths of 6 million Jews and hundreds of thousands of Americans. All of this is further evidence for the American people of who Donald Trump really is. This is a window into who Donald Trump really is, from the people who know him best, from the people who worked with him side by side in the Oval Office and in the Situation Room. And it is clear from John Kelly's words that Donald Trump is someone who, I quote, certainly falls into the general definition of fascist, who in fact vowed to be a dictator on day one and vowed to use the military as his personal militia to carry out his personal and political vendettas. Donald Trump is increasingly unhinged and unstable. And in a second term, people like John Kelly would not be there to be the guardrails against his propensities and his actions. Those who once tried to stop him from pursuing his worst impulses would no longer be there, and no longer be there to rein him in. So the bottom line is this. We know what Donald Trump wants. He wants unchecked power. The question in 13 days will be, what do the American people want? Thank you.
Well, there's a lot of things that she said there that I think that they are guilty of. What is your thoughts on all of this? You seem to be muted, John.
Sorry, there's a lot. There's what's remarkable to me is that there's a lot of presumption there. She's saying in his mind, he thinks that anyone who stands against him, is going to criticize him, that these are the people that are subject to his whims. That's all just a big leap that you just made up there. You just started saying that this is what Trump's going to do. The other thing that's just
but didn't they do that? But didn't the left do that to people who spoke up against them? Didn't they take away their rights to be on social media? Didn't they take their rights to own their media company? Didn't they throw them in jail for political persecution reasons? Yes. And there are people still sitting in jail for these things. Am I wrong?
Well, Steve Bannon was a Trump a cabinet member who spent 4 years in prison. He just got out recently the other day. But the other thing that's funny is that Biden had made some calls to cool the rhetoric after Biden was shot at in Pennsylvania, saying cool the rhetoric. But, somewhat ironically, Kamala Trump went ahead and played the Trump card of racism, going to liken a man to Hitler. And what surprises me is that when Trump was on Rogan, he actually made some comments about Robert E. Lee, the famous Confederate general who did nothing but win in the South. And, people were upset by that. And at one point, Robert E. Lee had been courted to be a general for the Union, and he said, "No, I'm a Virginian. I'm not going to do that." But it's the Trump card of racism to liken someone to Hitler. And okay, so Trump's out there saying, "I want generals like Hitler." Well, the generals that Hitler had didn't leave all this equipment behind for the Taliban to get. That's what he's trying to say. If he's saying we want generals like what Hitler had, case in point, Hitler's generals had the Blitzkrieg. Hitler's generals had the annexation of Austria. They took over Poland. They conquered France. People, France was Germany at one point. He wants the kind of generals who are going to project the might and power of the United States like that. He's not making a moral qualification saying, "Hey, we're going to go over there take over the world. He's saying we want effective generals. And if you're a student of military history, you can at least understand the power of the Blitzkrieg that was putting out lights in London every single night. He's saying we want that for ourselves. We don't want generals that are leaving stuff behind for the Taliban. The Taliban has parades all the time featuring A1 M1 Abrams tanks and our helicopters and all this. They paraded around to humiliate us, and we don't want that anymore, because when we left Afghanistan, it showed the world that we were weak. So Russian could get aggressive with the Ukraine. It showed Palestine that they could get rough with Israel. We telegraphed to the entire world, as if you're in a boxing match, that you're stunned, just like Joe Biden actually is. He's got little birds circling his head. That's what we telegraphed as a nation. Instead, what Donald Trump's saying is we want to project raw strength and power to the world. He's not saying that we're going to have our personal militia. For those of you who don't know, I'm not a lawyer. I just pretend to be one on the internet. But there is this little thing called the Posse Comitatus Act. Are you aware of the Posse Comitatus Act, Eric?
I am. Fill us in.
Of course you know what it is, because as a police officer, you know that for keeping domestic tranquility, you know that is the job of the police. The military cannot take any internal action for law enforcement. So the idea that Donald Trump is going to set up his Nazi generals who are going to go around and be his private army and be responsible only to him is ludicrous. And Eric, you were in the United States Army. You took an oath to uphold and protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I know quite a few people who are Army and ex-Army who have felt that their oath of protecting the United States Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, the enemy within, in other words, is what that means. Doesn't that mean that the rank and file of the United States Army and other branches are not going to go around and be volunteered or voluntold to be Trump's personal SS? I mean, it would be people like you that would do that, right? Because you were in the Army, and you're not going to do that.
Yeah, and and that's what I say. If Trump became Hitler, right? If we're wrong, and let me go to some of these headlines here. The Columbia Journalism Review says, "What if they finally voted for Hitler and they're just hoping for the best?" And it's this whole article that's extremely hyperbolic and, of course, full of assumptions, as you talked about. BBC also releasing an article 2 days ago, "What Trump's win means for Ukraine, the Middle East, and China." And it has this again a lot of assumptions. But let's just go with this Columbia Review. It says, "What if they finally voted for Hitler?" Well, if we did, if we come to find out that we were really wrong, what we would do, John, is we would use our Second Amendment right to take down that tyrannical government and bring it back and restore it to what it's supposed to be.
Hey, liberals and leftists and Democrats everywhere, do you realize that if you're afraid of your government and you're afraid of the force that they pose, and if you're afraid of government overreach into your life at the hands of Donald Trump, do you realize you just met the definition of what being a conservative is? Because we want smaller and lesser government, and we don't want it affecting our lives. And you're saying you're worried about Donald Trump having his own personal army, his own personal Stutzstaffel coming into your life and coming after you if you criticize him. First of all, this is not Nazi Germany. This is not modern day Germany. Angela Merkel puts people in prison for their social media posts when they criticize leaders of other country. If you want to go out there and criticize Justin Trudeau, no one from the federal government is going to show up from Donald Trump's administration and put you in jail for it. This is going on right now in Germany. They totally ironically do not realize how that's happening. It's happening in England, where we are taking people and putting them in prison for their social media stuff. And the prisons in England are massively overcrowded. All their Victorian prisons are crumbling. It's been suggested that they all need to be closed. So they're streeting pedophiles and serious offenders in order to put away people who are posting things on social media, which is bonkers to me. But there used to be an era in the internet, and I want to harken back to that. It used to be that if you were arguing with someone in the YouTube comments section of something about whatever, politics or your favorite Battlestar Galactica or whatever, and as soon as you start losing that argument and you resort to what we call an ad hominem argument, you call someone Hitler. The rules used to be the first person to mention Hitler loses. Now, okay, Donald Trump mentioned Hitler. He wants to project power like the Blitzkrieg did. Not exactly, I get where that will draw some kind of criticism, but the leap and the assumptions that he's going to have that kind of power being expressed in the United States is ridiculous. And she's liking him to Hitler. But why is she doing this? It is the playbook, and always has been, of the Liberal Party to increase fear and for purposes of manipulation. Never let a crisis go to waste. has always been their mode. Look at how afraid people were in 2020. People were afraid of this disease, and much of that was churned up and drummed up and made to be worse for what it is. And the world bent a knee to the 2020 COVID regulations, except for people like me. I always listen to other news reports saying like, "Hey, back in 2020, we all fell for this," and I'm like, some of us didn't. Some of us were not afraid, and some of us never fell for this stuff. And we couldn't be manipulated. We weren't afraid of dying. I'm not afraid of dying from COVID. And so they were never able to manipulate me. But when you play the ultimate trump card of racism, and you say that Trump is Hitler, what you set up is an ends justifies the means situation, because who wouldn't kill Hitler? Like in an abstract moral sense, he's an active shooter on an industrialized scale. The amount of cemeteries that were built and filled up with people at the architectural hands of Adolf Hitler, there's only Stalin, as a matter of sheer numbers, is worse than him. So if you liken him to Hitler, if he is Hitler, that means the ends justifies the means. It means we can do anything. It means you'd be morally justified in shooting at him again. And I believe that that's the kind of rhetoric that the Stokes, they're trying to stoke that kind of hatred and insanity. I mean, in case in point, he's already been shot at twice. Eric, go ahead.
I feel like the same people that put their mask on without questioning, the same people that denied you a right to come into their restaurant or to come into their place of business or to work for you and to make an income for your family because you did not get the vaccine or you questioned the vaccine, the same people that allowed this to happen are probably the same type of people who allowed Hitler to put gold stars on Jews and who allowed the Jews to be rounded up. They were the people that said, "Are you hard?" You know, these same people who are afraid of their government and submitting to their government are the same types of people who submitted to Hitler. So it's the people that didn't submit to this, the people that question the vaccine, the people who are continuing, the people like RFK Jr. Jessica Sutter from the Pussy Dolls always has such great things to say about this because she was affected negatively by vaccine injuries. And when you hear those, it's people like this that are not just bending the knee, that are raging against
They're not afraid
the
to
machine.
speak out, right?
You know, are the ones that are not going to fall into Nazism. And so the left, who is accusing, or in this case, Kamala Harris accusing that he is going to have his own militia. Well, don't forget that Nancy Pelosi, who is one of the, the closest advocates of the left, she is kind of like one of the main representatives of the left, and Kamala Harris, she was the one that was urging more federal police to try to help fight crime in places like Oakland, in places like San Francisco, and places like Baltimore. So it's the use of, instead of empowering the local police department, the local jurisdictions, and giving them the means to fight their own crime, giving them the DAs, the tough on crime, the tools that they need to be successful. Instead, what they do is they put that money into federal entities and up the federal policing, which again, federal policing, that is Nancy Pelosi's militia going into the town and enforcing crime and rules the way that she wants them to be enforced, because she's in the pockets of the DAs and she's in the pockets of these, and it's all for political reasons and not because they care about you.
The ongoing Democrat strategy is that they do this very well. I almost have to commend them. But they've always controlled the rhetoric by accusing their enemies of that which they are guilty of. So they accuse us of being racist. They accuse us of being Nazis, of collaborators to the coming big government, as though, as we just demonstrated with 2020, that the collaborators to the big government back then were the ones who would have been bending the knee and turning a blind eye. And just to bring up Peanut the Squirrel, I'm sure you've seen the memes where it's Christopher Waltz's character from Inglourious Bastards. You're sheltering squirrels here, aren't you? You know, a big government who will come in and kill your pets. But when they control the rhetoric and they say that you're a racist and that you're a Nazi, and that you would jail your political opponents, even though they attempted to put Donald Trump in prison, they put Steve Bannon in prison. What it causes is this almost playground. I know you are, but what am I? Because if we're supposed to go back and level charges of what the Democrat Party is actually doing, what is it going to sound like? They're going to say, well, you guys are Nazis. In truth, liberals are always calling for bigger and bigger and bigger government. Biggest government of all is fascism by definition. The National Socialist Party was a leftist organization, just the same way that the Democrat National Committee is. It's just a matter of degree. But they control the rhetoric. So once they put it out there saying, you're going to jail your political opponents, you're going to do this, that, the other thing, once we start saying like, hey, that's what you're doing, it all becomes noise, right? It becomes noise that the public's no longer paying attention to. Adam Carolla made this great remark a few years ago that right now is the best time that there is for racists, real racists, like people that genuinely have hatred in their heart for Black people, people of color, whatever, any kind of hate mongering person, the person who is legitimately like that. You know why? They're completely cloaked. Because right now, everybody's going around and pointing fingers at everyone else and saying, you're a racist. And it's a way of putting people on the defensive. It's about power dynamics. You're not really a cop or a correctional officer or a 911 dispatcher until someone calls you a racist. That's the moment you get baptized as a true professional. And it's about putting you on your heels and making you defensive. But it's also the worst thing that you can be in our society that requires the least amount of proof. Kamala said, in his mind, anyone who criticizes him is subject to this enforcement. The thing is about racism is that there's a certain presumption. You have no idea what's going on in someone's mind. You have no idea what's going on in someone's heart. But it's easy to just label them and say that, hey, you're a racist, and it automatically leaves them up for being discredited. But these are my final thoughts on it. So I ask you, listener, have you been to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C.? They say that history is written by the winners. You want to know what history is and what Adolf Hitler means? Well, we get to demonize Adolf Hitler because we won. Well, in a strict sense, the Russians won the war and we helped. But if you want to see history as written by the losers, go to the Holocaust Museum. And what you will find there is horrors beyond comprehension. You will see lampshades made out of human skin. You will see gold fillings taken from the mouths of slaughtered Jewish people. You'll find their wedding bands stolen from them. You will see documents and remarks about eugenics programs. Dr. Josef Mengele, the things he would do to people, that he would pressurize them and depressurize them to see how much a person could take before he exploded or imploded. How much could we microwave a person before he would die? What about surgery with no anesthesia? These are the things that happened in the Holocaust. If you've never seen it, watch this episode of Band of Brothers. It's like episode 8. It's called Why We Fight. But the 101st Airborne was marching through Europe on their way to Berlin, and they didn't know that they were going to find this, but they found a concentration camp. I don't know if it was Dachau or Auschwitz or whatever. But watch this HBO series. Watch this one episode if you watch none other. It's called Why We Fight. And you see translucent, starving Jewish people held in these camps. You see bodies piled up. And I know that it's only an HBO show from 20 years ago, but if you want to have any idea of the absolute depravity and sheer evil that was Adolf Hitler, you've got to watch that. And if you're going to throw around Adolf Hitler's name and you're going to attach it to Donald Trump, what you are doing is, first of all, you're being preposterous because the American people are not going to allow that to happen. I'm pro-Trump, but I'm not going to let a Trump regime put their hands on anyone. But you're belittling the Holocaust to say that the things that happened there could happen here at the hands of Donald Trump. You're ignoring the reality of the Holocaust to the point where you're just saying, he's Hitler. You're making it a YouTube comment. Well, the truth is that Adolf Hitler killed millions and millions and millions of people and displaced millions more, and the reason why he's our go-to guy for being the worst thing you can be is because he caused so much human misery and so much suffering that persists really to this day. And the idea that Donald Trump or that anyone in American politics is going to rise to that level because you don't like him cheapens the Holocaust. It cheapens the things that happens to Jews. And maybe that's all very in vogue right now with Democrats because there is a strong streak of anti-Semitism over there. And if you don't believe me, here's where you can check your receipts. It's well known that when Hillary Clinton was going for the nomination, she did so against Bernie Sanders, and he was very popular. The young people love Bernie Sanders. And Debbie Washington.
And if you want to talk about a cheated election, I think what they did to Bernie Sanders was absolutely
that's exactly
diabolical.
what I'm getting at, Eric. You want to talk about cheated elections? We just talked about some of the numbers earlier. Hillary Clinton was always going to be the heir apparent, right? She was Secretary of State. But before that, she wanted to be president. After Bush, she said, it's my turn, which would have been terrible for global politics after the neocons of Dick Cheney and then Hillary Clinton. You want to talk about where else we'd still be. But unfortunately, this well-spoken guy out of Illinois showed up and knocked everyone's socks off, and they gave it to Barack Obama, which pissed her off. Well, now it's her turn. So she's going up in the Democrat primaries yet again, all these years later, so much older. And Bernie Sanders is the one who's getting likes and subscribes from the young people out there in the Democrat Party. This old white, you know what I mean? And so Debbie Wasserman Schultz effectively torpedoed his campaign. And there are emails from Debbie Wasserman Schultz in which she referred to Bernie Sanders as a kike, which, if you've never heard that word, is a ethnic slur against Jewish people. So the anti-Semitism streak, the racist streak, is strong.
Well, I mean, that's why they didn't. Was that the same reason they didn't choose Shapiro for her?
I believe it's how the hell could you not choose the governor
Jewish
of Pennsylvania? Like, strategically, you choose,
it made no sense to pick Waltz. And I always said when Waltz was chosen, I was like, this is the best thing that's ever happened to the Republicans. This is the best thing that could have happened to Trump, because I think she would have sealed the deal with choosing Shapiro out of Pennsylvania. She would have won that whole state. And he was he was much more convincing and much more intelligent than Waltz. I mean, Waltz was a buffoon, an idiot, and an extremist. And it's like, if you're trying to win, if you're trying to win the people who are on the fence, you don't go to the guy who's completely the opposite side of the fence.
Right. And just case.
But I don't think they chose him because he was Jewish.
No, that it was that exact reason. They said it's too problematic in light of everything that's going on with the young people and the anti-Israeli stuff that's going on right now. But case in point, somebody like Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, she was tremendously popular at one point until she had mentioned in her book that she had to euthanize one of her own dogs, which, her point was that she didn't put hard work on other people. She did it herself. But the reason why someone like Kristi Noem never had a chance of becoming vice president for Donald Trump is because South Dakota has 3 electoral votes. They're not a swing state, right? So Kristi Noem, as popular as she was, as conservative as she was, everything that she had going for in terms of charisma, beauty, being adored by people, it never mattered because she only had 3 electoral votes. You do have to pick a vice president who matters. Like, what happens when you pick Sarah Palin out of Wasilla, Alaska? Well, Alaska doesn't have a lot of electoral votes either. Like, that was also a bad decision. So they didn't pick Shapiro for reasons of pure racism. So now they're making racist decisions. They have emails in which they're calling Bernie Sanders a kike. But what are we supposed to do as conservatives? Are we supposed to call them to the carpet and say, like, hey, this whole anti-Jew thing, this whole anti-Jewish, anti-Semitism thing, do you realize that when your talking points are the same as Adolf Hitler, and you do that without any self-awareness, that you do not recognize that you are on the wrong side of history? And that's what's going on right now with people who are pro-Palestine. Their talking points are the same as Hitler, and they do not realize it.
When they literally take down conservative news networks for the first time in history, and it's done by liberals. I mean, you accuse Donald Trump of being the end of journalism. You literally, Joe Biden literally put the nail in the coffin and went into Project Veritas, a conservative media network who did phenomenal journalism, actually, and you took their ability to do real life journalism away. Julian Assange on the opposite side, who was a Democrat, you took his ability away to do journalism, and you imprisoned this man, and Hillary Clinton even offered to blow him up in another person's embassy. And I'd like to go even further. Joe Rogan was a Democrat when he started. Joe Rogan hated conservative. Joe Rogan was an atheist. Joe Rogan wasn't a biblical man. Joe Rogan was everything that I, for a person in stand-up, but he was one of the greatest interviewers over time. And because I'm a reasonable person, I used to listen to Joe Rogan simply because he asked the best questions. I don't agree with everything that Howard Stern or Oprah did back in the day, but at the time, they were good journalists. They asked good questions. They were good interviewers, and you could always learn from the people that they were interviewing. But now, people like Tim Pool, who was a Democrat for Vice News, and but when they were allowed, they did not allow him to tell the truth about the BLM riots. He quickly became red-pilled. Same with Joe Rogan. When Joe Rogan gave them the opportunity to come on a show to help him, I like how the Democrats say that they don't have, Trump won because he went on these grifters, as Colbert would like to put it, that he went on these shows and that he had this grifters platform. Well, the left doesn't have one of these grifters. No, you had the grifters. You had the Tim Pool. You had Joe Rogan. Those were your guys. You just shit on them because they were doing really good journalism, because you had to hide what shady crap you were doing. And instead of working with them or stopping what you were doing, stopping the shady shit, and actually, because people are becoming aware of what the left is actually doing. They're saying one thing and doing another. It's like that suspect that's like, I'm not resisting, but he's literally punching the cops. We can see through that. It's obvious and it's apparent. That's why we love body cameras so much. But the left has to stop what's the word that the gaslighting the American public with propaganda media, because we're starting to see through it. And if you go and you research what Julian Assange was trying to call out, Julian Assange was against the right, and he was exposing George Bush. Why did Hillary Clinton need to get involved in that? It's because they're of the same people. There is no right and left. There's this industrial military complex. There's an industrial pharmaceutical complex. And that's why Dick Cheney went in with Kamala Harris, and she proudly took his endorsement.
By the way, why did they love that? Why did they say, hey, we got Dick Cheney on our side? It's like, do you guys...
most hated person by the left,
He was, by the way, the most hated vice president, not Kamala. Do you know why Dick Cheney is more hateable? Because Dick Cheney was a person of consequence. The things that Dick Cheney did actually mattered. Like, he had a voice in George Bush's ear and caused all this terrible waste and loss of life and Arab life, but also American life. Kamala Harris never did anything important. So you can't say that she's the most hated vice president because she's not a person of ill consequence, because she's not a person of consequence. Ultimately, Kamala Harris and her story as VP doesn't even matter. But finally, just my last comments about Debbie Wasserman Schultz. After that whole scandal, do we not remember that she was the one moderating the debate between Trump and Hillary Clinton? Why do we have somebody who's calling someone a kike and being the chairman of the DNC, moderating a debate, and yet we're going to liken Donald Trump to Hitler and say that his Madison Square Garden rally was a Hitler rally when there were Israeli flags and people of all different kinds there? That's not what happened when there was a Nazi rally there in the 30s or whatever. But as I said, they control the rhetoric, so that when you point the finger back at them and saying, no, we're going to expose the truth, that anti-Semitism and National Socialism is the bread and butter of the Nazi party. Its very ethos is baked into what Democrats are. Unfortunately, because they control the rhetoric and because they said it first, we get seen as children. I know you are, but what am I? This sort of schoolyard throwing it back at them. And then once both sides are pointing fingers at each other and saying, well, this is what you are and this is what you are, now the American public is deaf to that and they don't care and they move on. They ignore the fact that, like, official emails from the DNC contain the word kike. They ignore the fact that Democrats are very pro-Palestine, that they're taking down American flags and Israeli flags to hang up these things, and that they're blind. And you can be as mad as you want to be about Israelis and prosecuting their war and doing what they have to do. Some of it's justifiable, some of it's not. I'm not here to comment on that. But when your rhetoric in your own party is anti-Jewish, and when big government is what you are all about, and National Socialism and the embrace of democratic socialism as the ultimate goal for guys even like Bernie Sanders, how can you point the finger at the right that wants smaller government and doesn't go along with big government ideals like putting on masks and getting shots? How is it that you think that all of us are going to line anyone up and put them on a train to a factory at the edge of town where smoke billows day and night? It's not going to happen.
What's more socialist? Leaving a big political decision up to the people of the states to vote on, or maybe taking somebody who's the vice president and just saying, I know that we have a process to this, who's going to run for the DNC, but we're not going to allow the people to make that choice. We're just going to appoint Kamala Harris as the vice president. Which one of those is more socialist?
They didn't let their own people. They say that, Donald Trump's a threat to democracy, which I want to remind you, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. But who's the real threat when you didn't let people on your own side pick who's running for president? Your own primaries, which are not codified by law, but you didn't allow it to happen. And now you want to say that it's because Kamala was so unpopular, which I don't buy. That's an excuse, saying that she was unpopular while she's lost. Kamala Harris was as popular as Hillary Clinton when it comes to numbers. She was almost as popular as Barack Obama, maybe 2 million less. She wasn't nearly as popular, if you want to believe the numbers, by Joe Biden. But you know who's more popular than Hillary Clinton, than Kamala Harris, and however many legitimate votes were for Joe Biden? Donald Trump. So it has nothing to do with her failures or whatever. And
what do we do now? Let's throw this wrench in there, John. What do we do now? Do we get rid of the do we get rid of the electoral college now, because that's what the left is going to be crying? Do we now get rid of or do we now load up the Supreme Court as the left wanted to do, they thought was fair? Or what was the other one that the left was really pushing for, ending the filibuster, all the things that the left wanted to do because it was in her favor. Does the right now go in and do that again? What's more socialist? It's this whole gaslighting thing. We're going to blame you for doing all the things that we just did. When we were elected, we tried to get rid of the filibuster. We tried to fill the Supreme Court. We tried to do all of these things that if Donald Trump tried to do, they themselves and myself, I would be like, that's not right. Like, it's not the electoral. It's supposed to be the way it is because it makes things fair. It gives the American people a real voice. And so, but I guarantee you right now, if Donald Trump tried to do all those things that the left just tried to do for the last 4 years and spent far too much time and wasted far too much time. Again, even I think the left spent far too much time. Like, I think it's reasonable. I think most reasonable people saying like leaving abortion up to the states is probably the most reasonable thing you could do in that situation because there's not really a good answer or a good outcome one way or the other on the abortion argument.
That's tenets of federalism. That's what our country is supposed to be. In fact, the 10th Amendment says, hey, anything not already laid out in these previous 9 amendments is supposed to be just left up to the states. We've already had strong state identity before the Civil War. People tend to call themselves Virginians. I mentioned Robert E. Lee. He said, I'm a Virginian. And that used to be our identity, is that we used to call ourselves by what state we were from or lived in or whatever. And that used to be the foundational thing. And the truth is, if you're afraid of Donald Trump, and if you're afraid of big government, and if you are appalled by the idea that someone living in the White House 100 miles, 1,000 miles, 10,000 miles away from you, that he doesn't represent your views, then you should be glad that you only have to appeal to someone who's 20 miles away from you in your state capital, that you can go over to Raleigh, that you can go over to Austin, that you can go to Sacramento, that wherever that is, and you get to make the case for your beliefs there. You don't have to fly all the way to Washington, D.C., because Donald Trump and J.D. Vance says, we're not touching this. We're not going to impose federal laws on abortion. And yet the women who have been messaging me and saying that we're going to lose their rights, I'm just like, well, if you're in Michigan, I guess you can just drive over and take a road trip of a few hours, and you can go over to Lansing and you can voice to Governor Gretchen Whitmer your concerns about abortion. You don't have to appeal to Donald Trump. As a Michigander or as a Minnesotan, you can go and talk to Tim Walz and say your views on and what you want to have there. And here's the other thing, is that if you live in a state like North Dakota, which is probably bound to not have abortion, and you want to make that decision for yourself, I guess you could take a road trip over to Minnesota and you could make that still happen for yourself. And the fear mongering out there is that if you live in Fargo and you drive across the river, you literally just cross the bridge and drive over into Moorhead, Minnesota. These two cities are right next to each other on the border. And you go over there and have a procedure that when you go over to Fargo, you're going to be arrested. Well, I'm going to tell you, jurisdiction doesn't work that way. That if the Fargo police are not going to arrest you and try you in that county for a crime which occurred in Moorhead. So even if in Fargo that would be a crime, if you did it in Moorhead, they don't have jurisdiction to do that. And they're not going to extradite you across state lines. Again, like I said, you could go over to Minnesota and you can stay there if you want. They're not going to extradite thousands and millions of people for things like this when they wouldn't have any jurisdiction to hear the case in the first place. But this is the fear mongering going on, Eric. They're saying that if you go to a blue state and you get this procedure done, when you get home, someone's going to put you in handcuffs for murder, which, first of all, what kind of government is watching you travel and observing you walking into a clinic and then following you home? That's a massive surveillance state, which again is not going to happen. There's places in England and things like that where that.
But if it was going to happen, who would be supporting that? Dick Cheney, because Dick Cheney was all about
Dick Cheney, and the left would be the ones.
Kamala Harris, you know what I'm saying?
They would be the ones supporting that.
It always goes back to the left with fear mongering, fear of the climate to get you to vote for us, fear that you're going to lose abortion to vote for us, fear about this, and the right has always been about how are we going to get more money in your pockets? How are we going to make you grow successfully? How are we going to, and again, going with morals and moral values and the focus on these things that would literally make you more prosperous and more. That's what the right kind of leans on. I think it's clear that the left is just, it's all based on fear, and it's all about this government dependence versus you're saying keep eating the Cheetos. You're allowed to be fat. That's great, because then you will depend on us for our pharmaceuticals. You'll depend on us. Don't do yoga. Don't do chiropractics. Don't drink unpasteurized milk. Don't do all these things. Be afraid of these things that are extremely good for you, and they only have the dangers of these are far less than even these pharmaceuticals that you're trying to push down your throat. But yet that we were going to make you try extremely scared of you. And then these sheep become scared of these things and they don't do these things. It's like, I can't tell you how many people are like, oh my God, you drink raw milk. What if you get sick? And I'm like, oh my God, you get a vaccine cocktail. What if you get autism? You know what? You take vaccine cocktails. Like, what if you get spinal, all these different things that you come from. And then you got RFK Jr., who was a perfect example for all of this. He had a real shot at running for the vice president. He was a real opponent, but they didn't allow him on CNN, on the propaganda-based news measures. They didn't allow him to voice his opinion. They took his platforms off of YouTube, again, under the basis of fear and fear-mongering that this guy was anti-vax, which he's clearly not anti-vaccination. He's just anti-certain vax and anti-exposing some of the things that the pharmaceuticals took advantage of. It all goes back to fear with the left, and I think the people have seen through it, and that's why you saw this big, ginormous red wave. Listen, Fox Media is all about the totality of these stories. It's not about assumptions. We bring you receipts. We show you what's going on in the real world, and then we dissect it objectively and reasonably, and we also leave it up for your voices. That's why we want you to leave us a comment down in the comment section. If you want to be a part of the Fawkes, Fawkes news movement, it's very simple. Just hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and most importantly, share this with a friend. Tell a friend to listen to this episode. Text it to them. Send it to them on Facebook. We don't need thousands of followers. We need one person to get one other person to be a part of this and this media group to keep on driving so that we can keep paying journalists, that we can keep going out. We already have plans to be out there January 6th, January 20th. We've already been boots on the ground in Western North Carolina. We are creating and self-funding in a documentary with a film crew called Fawkes Media to put a documentary exposing what's really going on in Western North Carolina and then questioning why and what's in it for the government to not expose the thousands of dead people are in North Carolina. This all started for me in Hawaii, where I was getting reports from law enforcement officers in Hawaii telling me that the death toll was being lied about and that they're not exposing this, and then that we've completely forgot about it in the media and it's been washed away. And so I wasn't going to allow that to happen anymore. Now I'm on the boots on the ground in Western North Carolina. We are doing journalism. So if you want to help the movement, we're not asking you to fund the movement. We're simply asking you to share this with a friend. John, I'm so glad that we started this together, the Fawkes News Group. If you guys want awesome, very hilariously given and very objectively given sports news, I think what you and Jason are doing is phenomenal on our sports show. And I think
it's so unfortunately objective because obviously I can't do much but criticize the Cowboys this year. So that's how you know that even though I've been a fan my whole life, all I'm doing every single week is ragging on them. So.
Yeah, so completely objective. Thank you guys for joining us here on Fawkes Media. Today's show is brought to you by Tapped. This is armbar hot sauce. It's jujitsu inspired hot sauce. All the ingredients are completely natural. Let me read these off. I think it's important. Jalapenos, Thai bird chili, garlic, shiitake mushrooms, onions, Fuji apples, tomato, curry powder, kosher salt, monk fruit sugar, apple cider vinegar. So all of these things, all natural. There's nothing else. There's no acids added to this. There's no like preservatives, anything. And it's all about the umami experience. So it's a little bit of heat with a lot of flavor. I tasted this for my first time today. I don't even know these people. They just sent me this. Coming to find out, I did know them, but I didn't know it when I did the unboxing, and I tasted it and I found the card. It was actually from a podcast that I went on called Combat Creative. But anyway, go to tappedsauce.com, TAPPED sauce.com, tappedsauce.com. And then also Shield Box, SHIELD Shield Box for first responders. It is a box that comes in. It's a $55, I believe it's $55 subscription. You get this box. It comes with like different handcuffs to try out, handcuff pouches, patches, gloves, knives, brands like Gerber, Smith & Wesson, 511 Tactical. You're going to get a different box with a bunch of different goodies in it to try out and test. These goodies are worth way more than $55. You're going to get quality products delivered to you as flashlights, all the things that you can think of that you might need as a law enforcement officer. These boxes are going to come with something different every week. So big shout out to Shield Box and Tapped. Again, what do we got on sports news for this week before we get out of here?
Well, we're probably going to be talking about the Cowboys again. The trade deadline just ended. They made another bonehead move that is designed to set the Cowboys back forever. We saw the Bengals and the Ravens playing last night. We'll have our picks again for the coming weekend. And as always, just commenting on anything remotely criminal that's going on in the NFL. We're always calling that to the carpet, whether it was their lawsuit with DirecTV and the scandal that went on there, or every once in a while a Detroit Lions defensive lineman pees on somebody on a plane. We always expose that. Or there was a guy who played for the Indianapolis Colts who joined a cult and disappeared his son and abused him. And these are the kinds of things that we talk about there, exposing the history, the rewritten history of Ray Lewis. It's actually a good show. I say that
I love
patting
the
myself
show.
on the back, but
It's so much more fun because I'm not a sports guy and I don't like sports. But when I learned of corruption and I learned of all these hidden agendas going on, I'd love you guys doing an episode on Stephen Smith. I want to know who this guy is. Well, he's popping up more in politics. He's popping up more on podcasts. I've never been an ESPN commentator, but I've always seen him as I'm flipping through the TV and pass by. I've seen clips of him and stuff, but now I'm starting to see more of a political thing for him. I think there's something there. Maybe I don't know enough to even call that out, but I'd love to know what this guy's history is, Stephen A. Smith, and why now is everybody like The View and all these other big giant podcasts, why are they all listening to him on politics and things like that?
Yeah,
Maybe there's something there. Maybe he's a lot
I
smarter.
hate Stephen A. Smith with all my heart, and I see him as an absolute charlatan like Colbert, where he kind of does the same thing. For him, his Trump is the Cowboys, and yet the Cowboys failing over the past 27 years probably added a couple stories to his house. But the other thing we might talk about is Herschel Walker, famous running back for the Cowboys and the Vikings. He ran for Senate in Georgia and lost. Is he going to be seeking or taking an appointment in the Trump administration? Could be interesting.
Oh, beautiful. All of your news, get it right here from FAWKES News, from myself, from Jonathan Bates. Until next time, listen, G.I. Joe says it the best. Maybe you didn't know about why Trump is being considered Hitler, but now you do know, and knowing is half
the battle. I don't know. Am I supposed to do a thing there? I don't know.
We can't. Let's do it together on 3. 1, 2, 3. And knowing
is half the battle.
battle.
We'll never figure it out.